Hey guys, it's Kevin here to finally review American Horror Story 1984. And what this season is basically about is the entire thing is an homage to classic 80s slasher movies. We center on a group of young adults, and basically they decide that they're going to be camp counselors at Camp Redwood. They think it's going to be just this very relaxing and fun environment, but they start to realize that there is something much more evil at play, and they are going to have to do a lot if they want to survive the nights. So, American Horror Story 1984, I'll be honest, I was not that excited for this season for a couple reasons. One, if you guys know, not a big fan of Apocalypse. I did not really like the way that season played out. I thought it had so much potential going into it, but just by the time it ended, it really left a sour taste in my mouth, and I just don't think I can say I like that season anymore. There's way too many flaws for me to overall say it's a solid season. I was trying to defend it for as long as I could, but I've kind of come to terms with the fact that it just was very disappointing. So I did not have the highest hopes for 1984, but then also the fact that this was a season that wasn't going to have any of the regular alums that we expect, like a Sarah Paulson, like Evan Peters, Francis Conroy. None of them were Jessica Lange, none of them were present in this season. But also, going from something grandiose like Apocalypse to something that felt so simplistic and almost like they were kind of taking a step back, and sort of like retracting from what worked in Apocalypse, which the grandiose stuff did very much work in that season, to now a much more simplistic season that really was just like a slasher movie. It just felt like a very uninspired concept to me, and I just wasn't very excited to see how it was going to play out. Especially because I'm not a huge fan of these corny slasher movies from the 80s. A lot of them I'm just not really a huge fan of. I don't think they hold up all that well. So I really didn't know how I was going to like this season. I did start this season when it first came out, but for some reason I just never got a chance to wrap it up until now. But I figured since Double Feature is finally coming out, I would do exactly what I did with Hotel and just finally give my brief thoughts. And I will say right now, this season very much surprised me. American Horror Story 1984 for me is probably some of the most fun I have had with an American Horror Story season, really since Cult. I think this is a season that is very unique, it's very different, and at points it feels very refreshing with what it's really trying to do. But we are just getting into right now, starting off with the cast. And that is something that I will say never fails to impress me with American Horror Story. I do think that most of the time they do put together a really good cast. And like I said, this is a very unique group because all of the regular veteran players aren't really here. It's a lot of the more newer ones and a couple old faces in there. Let's first talk about Emma Roberts, who of course plays, I guess, our main character Brooke, or at least she is for the majority of this season. And I think she does a really good job in this role. This is a much different role than what she usually does. Usually Emma Roberts is playing a very catty and bitchy character, but this time around she's playing someone that is a lot more wide-eyed and innocent, and I think she plays up that role very well. You can tell how much fun she is having, but there also are a lot more layers to Brooke that we do find out as the season does go on, and Roberts does do a really good job at playing the role. I feel like every episode she started to grow a little bit more as a character, and Roberts really just dug deep into that role, and I really like what she ended up doing. So I thought that she overall did a really strong job here and carried the season pretty well. Another person though that always does a great job and continues to here is Billie Lourd, who plays the character of Montana, who, once again, just such a fun character to watch this season. I don't know what it is about Billie Lourd, but she is such a great character actress, and I think this season she really gets to lean into just how crazy she can be. She really goes all in playing this character that is so complex. There's so much more going on with her than you really do expect. She's a very twisted character in that way, and Lourd really does does, I think, dive into that very well. I really enjoyed her role this season. For me, though, far and away, the best performance of this entire season has to be from John Carroll Lynch, who does, in fact, play our main villain here of Mr. Jingles, and I can't get into too much of why I enjoyed him without really diving into spoilers, but I really enjoyed his performance a lot here. I thought that he was very unnerving, he was very scary, but he also had a lot more going on with him that honestly makes for a more emotional type character than I really was expecting, and I can't really dive into why that is, but he gives one of the most, I think, genuine and emotional performances I've seen in this show in quite a bit, and I really loved what he ended up doing here. He, for me, by the end of the season, was far and away my favorite character, far and away the most impressive performance I had seen all season, and I just really liked what he ended up doing here overall. But the other thing I will really say about this season is that there are quite a few actors in here that I don't normally like all that much. But this season, that's not really the case. Specifically when it comes to Leslie Grossman, who I just have not really been a big fan of in this series. I don't really feel like she's ever fully fit. I didn't mind Meadow in Cult, but I really couldn't stand her character in Apocalypse. I thought she was honestly just really annoying in that. But here, she's playing a character that I think fits her a lot more. She plays the director of the camp and does it to perfection, honestly. I really liked what she ended up doing here. You really do buy into this role. She really gets to show, I think, how much more layered of an actress she can really be when you're not just giving her, like, the comedic relief role. They really try to give her something a little bit different here, and I think it really does work. And same goes for Cody Fern this season, who, as you guys know, I couldn't stand in Apocalypse. I fucking hated his performance in there. It was so just like laughable and corny to me, but here he is much more of the comedic relief, and I think while Leslie Grossman doesn't fit that role very well, Fern absolutely does. I mean, his character, Xavier, this is a guy where he just wants to be a celebrity. He wants to be on the cover of every single magazine. He wants to be, big on TV Guide and things like that. That's his entire motivation, and seeing how he tries to achieve that goal while in a camp, it makes for some really fun moments, and I really liked what Fern ended up doing here. I thought that he was a consistent standout in terms of comedy, and finally I think they found a role that really does fit this actor. Like I said, up till now I haven't really gotten the hype for him. After this season I definitely do, and I really liked what he ended up doing here overall. As far as the rest of the cast goes, I think everyone does do a really strong job. Some of the newer performances, Matthew Morrison is hysterical as the character of Trevor. This guy can be a bit of a buffoon at times, but he also has a very large package, and the show loves to really kind of make fun of that, and I thought that was, he definitely did do a really strong job in that role. I thought that, obviously, yes, a lot of people are going to have a hard time separating Will Schuester from Matthew Morrison, but for me, after a few moments, I was able to fully buy into what he was doing, and I really enjoyed his performance here. Zach Villa is amazing as Richard Ramirez. He is so unrelenting and creepy, and I just totally got the vibe of what he was doing. I thought that he really sunk his teeth into this role very well. But the other big standout of this entire season for me, and someone who I hope to God they bring back in other seasons, is Angelica Ross, who does play the character of Rita, who also is a lot more complex of a character than you really are expecting, and I enjoyed her immensely in this show. She ended up being probably one of the most likable characters, I think, and someone I really did find myself latching onto, and I really did buy into, like I said, what she was really doing. So yeah, I was a really big fan of her as a character. I thought that she was definitely someone that really ended up impressing me by the end of the season, and I really do hope she ends up coming back. I'm glad to see they are bringing her back for a double feature, because I think she definitely does deserve to be in the show more. Between this and Pose, Ross is really just showing how strong of an actress she can really be, and I really like what she ended up doing here. The one performance I will say that just never really worked for me was Gus Kenworthy, and what I will say about him is that, there are certain actors that, can start off in a certain way, whether it's they start off as an athlete, they start as a musician, and then they realize that they're really good at acting. Kenworthy's not one of those people for me. I did not really buy into anything that he was doing. I thought his performance fell very flat, honestly, and I just never really vibed with his performance. He was really the only performance to me that just didn't really work and just never really connected with him throughout the season, and I think he kind of did fall flat. But other than that, I think this is one of the strongest ensembles the show has had in quite a bit. I think everyone really does dive into the campier side of things very well, and I think it really does work. You really do see the fun that everyone is having this season, and it really does, I think, bode well for this season overall. All right, but now let's get into the directing and the writing, because that, I think, is probably the thing that really did impress me about this season. Is, like I said, going into it, I was not really excited for the more campier aspects, but this season really does lean heavily into it. American Horror Story is a very campy show. It can't be very over the top. It can be really ridiculous, and what's good about this season is that it completely embraces that. It knows that a lot of what's going on here is really stupid. It knows a lot of what's going on here is really over the top and dated, and it doesn't try to take itself all that seriously, and I think that tone works very well here because it just makes it a lot more fun and breezy for me. I really found myself never really getting bored with this season because of that. I think that overall, I think that tone worked very well as the season goes on. I will say, as the season goes on, it starts to take itself a bit more seriously and gets a bit more emotional, but for a while, like I said, this is much more of just a fun, easy watch, and I think it does work very well as that, and I think that the respect, but also the satire that they really do pay to the 80s. It works very well here overall, so I really did enjoy the directing throughout the season. The writing as well is so on point when it comes to these characters. I mean, you really do have everyone. You have the jock in Chet, you have the provocative girl in Montana, you have the innocent in Brooke, you have, the guy that is a little bit older, but also someone that everyone seems to be falling for in Trevor, and then you just have the guy that is just there to look good in Xavier. So I really do think there is a little something for everyone, and I think the show really does recognize that. But what I also really did appreciate is that as the series goes on, that's not all these characters are. Every single character in the show has a little bit more to them than you really are expecting. There's always twists that they unveil with these characters, and for me, it made these characters that much more interesting as a result. They went in some very, what I thought were going to be predictable directions, but by the end of the season, there were a lot of things they did that I honestly would not have expected, and I thought it worked very well here because you realize they're not just telling a story about, Friday the 13th, because for a while they are, but as the season goes on, you realize that this really is supposed to be, sort of a very tongue-in-cheek version of that, where it starts off that way and then it starts to get a little bit more authentic as it goes on. It starts to get a little bit more real, and I think they did a really good job with that. So I really did enjoy the writing within this season. And in terms of the 80s, I mean, they really go all out here. So many references, and you can tell that they are not necessarily trying to be the most fond of the 80s. There are even points where they'll blatantly make fun of the 80s, and I think it works really well as a result because, like I said, the season never takes itself too seriously. Like, there are definitely moments where it does, but it never tries to, it realizes that some of this is a little bit ridiculous, and I think it really does dive into that very well. So I really was impressed by a lot of the writing here, what they ended up doing with a lot of these characters. I thought worked very well, and the style, though I do have to say this season is so on point. You really do feel like you are watching a classic slasher movie throughout a majority of this. I mean, I really did feel at points the episodes feel less like episodes and just like one consistent movie. And I thought that was really impressive the way they were able to do that. It's honestly weird to me that this season, I feel like this is a season that you could just release all at once because you can just easily get into each episode. I found myself able to binge this pretty quickly. And I'm not usually someone that champions binging, but I mean, this season really is very, I think, bingeable in that way. It's very accessible. It's probably one of the more accessible American Horror Story seasons in quite a bit. That being said, this season is still not perfect. There are quite a few flaws that this season has that it does share with recent seasons of American Horror Story. One of them very much being, I think, that this season can be predictable. There are definitely some directions it goes in where you're like, okay, I saw that coming, is this really all they're going to do? But like I said, there are things that they ended up doing that I wasn't really expecting by the end, and that's something I really did appreciate about this season that made it feel a little bit more refreshing than others. There are some plot holes within this season, quite a few plot holes that they do end up introducing that just don't really go anywhere. There's quite a few things that they introduce in this season, and I just didn't really feel all that satisfied by the time they were wrapped up. One especially, I felt they just didn't really flesh out to its full potential, and I think they could have done a little bit more with overall. And then there are some characters that I do think just feel slightly underwritten. I think they could have done more with them, or you could have just cut them out entirely, and I would have definitely been fine with that. There weren't a lot of characters that I overall found myself feeling this way towards, but there were just a few where I'm like, you could probably do a little bit more with them. The one thing I will absolutely give this season, though, is the style, the look and the feel of everything. I mean, this really does feel like you are stepping into the 1980s. I mean, when it comes to the fashion, when it comes to the look of everything, even the way it's constructed, it's way different than what they usually do with an American Horror Story, and I really did enjoy that. It honestly is probably their most impressive in terms of style, in terms of cinematography. They really did try to do something different here, and I really did appreciate them going for that overall, and I think it works very well. And I mean, in terms of blood, I mean, they do not hold back when it comes to these kills. There are so many memorable kills that happen within this show that I think you are definitely not going to be forgetting anytime soon. And, if you're at all concerned that there's going to be a shortage of blood or gore, they get it done right in the first episode. There's like a really juicy kill. So yeah, I mean, there is no shortage of it whatsoever. I don't think there's a single episode that goes by where there isn't some kind of really gory killing. So I think that's definitely something that the show really does a fantastic job with and was a consistent element throughout the entire season. The soundtrack as well is also really great, and something I did appreciate is that I don't think this season tries to overuse its soundtrack. Yes, there are a lot of needle drops, but I never felt there were too many. I thought the ones that they used were placed in at the correct moments. I thought the ones that they used fit the tone nicely, and I definitely did enjoy that overall. So I did enjoy a lot of the needle drops throughout the season and the editing. I will say, I do think some episodes were a little too short. Some episodes are only 39 minutes, and I just wanted a little bit more from some of them, and that's a complaint I've had with other recent seasons, that I think their episodes are just a little too short overall. But I did appreciate, again, that this season had a more breezy quality to it. It's very fast-paced. It's very easy to get to. It really just kind of dives headfirst into everything, and that's something I really did appreciate. And for the first... And there is definitely a clear split in this season. I can't get into it much, but after episode 5, the show kind of becomes something else. It slows down a bunch, and really starts to dive deeper into these characters, and I can't really say why that is or what really ends up happening, but once we got to that point, I started to enjoy the season, honestly, even more. I know a lot of people said that's where the season kind of like goes off the rails, but if I'm being honest, I felt like this was one of the few seasons where that never really happened. I didn't really feel like this season ever got too crazy. I never felt like the season was too overly convoluted, and that's something I did really appreciate. And again, maybe it's because this is a season that's really embracing the camp, really embracing the ridiculous qualities to the show, that it just is a lot less frustrating. But I just never really felt that way like I did with, say, Apocalypse, where I feel like the second they introduced that time jump, the whole season just kind of went off a cliff from there. But yeah, overall, I mean, I never really felt that way. So now that I have pretty much dived into everything I can, I really do want to get into spoilers for this season, which, I mean, there really is a lot to talk about, whether it's some of the smaller reveals that happen, where one of the ones I really end up enjoying was actually all the way back in episode 2, where we find out that Brooke is not just this innocent virgin. Yes, she is, but she's been through a lot. She had this marriage with this guy, and it seemed like it was all working great, but then his brother came in, and he was jealous of what was going on, and his brother and her fiance just died right then and there. And that, to me, I thought was a really good moment for Brooke, because it showed why she is this way. Why is she so skittish? Why is she so tense always? Why is she not able to, why is she so awkward? Why is she so standoffish as a character? It just made a lot more sense, and that's when I really started to like Brooke even more. I liked her still at that point, but after they had that reveal, I think she became an even better character. So I really did appreciate what they ended up doing there. And then the reveal with Montana that she's actually the brother, that she's actually the sister of Brooke's fiance, I thought was a really good reveal. And you realize that she's actually there because she's there to kill Brooke. That's her entire mission. It added a layer to her character that I really did like. I will say, granted, I do think that was a little bit underwritten, her relationship with Richard Ramirez especially. I don't think they dived as deep into as they needed to. And so I just never found myself able to fully buy into that. But I really liked what this did for Montana, because you understood her motivations, but still thought that she was a psychopath. And I thought they did a good job with that overall. And I thought that was definitely a really good reveal. And then, of course, the big reveal, and then the other reveal that I really enjoyed was that Rita, who you think in the beginning of the season, she is just this, she's just the camp nurse. That's all she really does. Turns out, no, she's actually Donna Chambers, who's this huge reporter who's like looked deep into all of these murders that have happened at Camp Redwood. I really enjoyed seeing that a lot. I thought that was a very good twist, and I thought that it made her character that much more interesting afterwards, and that was definitely one of the moments I really ended up liking her character. So I thought that was a really good twist reveal. And of course, then the big one being that Mr. Jingles is really not the villain of the season. It's actually Margaret Booth. I liked this reveal a lot. I thought it worked really well for her character, and I thought they did a good job with that, and her reasoning for being this way, where she was kind of picked on because she was friends with Mr. Jingles, and people saw her as, this weirdo for being friends with him, and so she basically framed him for everything that was going on, and has since, developed, been the counselor ever since then, and sort of hiding her more demented side, I thought worked really well. That being said, as much as I did enjoy that reveal, I do think as a villain, Margaret Booth is pretty weak. I was not a huge fan of her as a character. I felt like once the reveal happened, I just didn't really latch onto her much. There's never really a clear motivation for why she's doing what she's doing, and I think that does weaken some of her stuff a little bit. I think her character just ended up being very one note to me, and maybe it's because the other characters I thought were a little bit more than what I was overall expecting them to be. That's maybe why I felt like it kind of cheapened some of her stuff, but I just never really latched onto her as a character, and I think the way the show wanted me to, so I was a little bit disappointed by what they ended up doing with her, and I didn't really like that twist all that much. I did like the twist a lot, but I didn't really feel like they did all that much with it, other than, oh, she's just evil now, and she's gonna kill everyone, and she's gonna try to, take the cam for herself, and she ends up framing Brooke, and at this point, the show changes at that point, which I thought was interesting. I liked the idea that the first 5 episodes are Friday the 13th, sleepaway camp type show. It's what you expect. But then, once we get to episode 5, the show turns into something else entirely. It's a lot more slower paced. It's a lot more character focused. And I thought that worked really well because for a while I was kind of like, how are they going to maintain this for 9 episodes? And I like the fact that they chose not to. They knew they couldn't. They knew that there was no way that they would be able to keep this going for 9 episodes. So they decided that they would end the, slasher stuff at 5, and I thought that was a good point to stop it because that's when things were getting really juicy. The face-off with Montana and Brooke, and then Brooke being framed for what ended up happening, I thought was really good, and it makes Brooke a much more interesting character after that. It really kind of hardens her, and she kind of goes through this arc where she's not entirely sure if she wants to be good. Does she want to be this killer that people are accusing her of? I thought that was a good moment for her, and then her, losing her virginity to Ray, and her then realizing that Ray is actually a ghost, and realizing that she lost her virginity to a ghost. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty funny, but they also do a good job of diving a bit deeper into that with her, sort of wondering, does she really want to be this way? Is this really what she wants to do for the rest of her life? And then, she fakes her death, and Donna ends up saving her. But the one thing I will say about this is that I did feel Brooke got a bit sidelined towards the end. I didn't really feel like she was the main character by the end of all of this. It felt like there was just a lot more going on that was interesting to me, and Brooke as a character just never really they gave as much focus to as they needed to. She didn't really feel like the main character after episode 5, and that was a little bit disappointing because I thought Emma Roberts was doing some really great work. Like, I love the scene where she almost kills that girl and then Donna convinces her not to because that's not really who she is. I thought that was a really good moment, but again, I just needed more. I needed more from that character, and I didn't really feel like they gave it to me overall, so I was a little bit disappointed by that. What I really liked was what they ended up doing with the character of Mr. Jingles. Like I said, by the end of the show, he was far and away my favorite character. I like the idea that he's able to get away from this for a while. He lives this quiet life with his son and his wife who lives in Alaska. Everything seems to be going great, but then Ramirez shows up, and there's this great clash between those two. That whole conflict was easily the part of the show I was the most riveted in because you understood completely, why Jingles, or now as we know him as Richter, felt the way that he did, why he felt he needed to get revenge on Ramirez for what happened. I thought was just such a great moment when they're fighting. It just, every punch felt so real in that moment, and also getting to see his backstory where we realize that he had a very troubled childhood. His mother was very emotionally abusive, who Lily Rabe, absolutely killed it. If you want to talk about, the type of cameo that deserves an award, really just shows how strong of an actress Lily Rabe is. I'm glad that they're using her a lot more in this upcoming season because I think the show really I think the show really underestimates just how great of an actress she really can be and how much of an asset she can be for American Horror Story, and I think we really did see it in that moment. But when we dive deeper into his past, we realize that he basically witnessed his brother die. He's always felt guilt because of it, and it was just a really great moment, when he eventually ends up dying and he's reunited with his family. It feels satisfying in the end. I really liked the way they end up wrapping things up there, but then when you get to the finale and it turns out that the whole thing is focused on his son, Bobby, I would have never expected them to go in that direction, and you're wondering if Bobby will turn out like his father. Will he have as much emotional damage as his father? And he doesn't. And in an American Horror Story first, he actually doesn't go in that direction, which I really liked a lot. This is the first season I can think of in a while where we have a legitimately uplifting ending where he does actually get to see his father. He reconciles with him, and right when you think Margaret Booth is going to kill him, she's gonna get the upper hand, he's actually saved by his grandmother at the last second. She intervenes and says, take us instead. And he gets to walk away from Camp Redwood as a free man, as someone who isn't going to be plagued by this. He is going to basically end all of the horrors that went down there. I mean, it was just such a satisfying moment, and I really do applaud them for going in a much more uplifting direction than usual. I feel like American Horror Story, it seems like it's always going to wrap up that way and then they overcomplicate it, but not this time. They really did a great job, I think, of giving it a more satisfying and generally happy ending, and so I liked that. I liked what they ended up doing, and like I said, I think by the end of the season, everything going on with Richter was easily my favorite stuff. I loved everything they ended up doing with him this season. But then also Montana as a character, I thought got so much more interesting once we started to explore the idea that she was just mercilessly killing people. She didn't feel a reason to be good, so she wanted to be bad. Xavier felt the same way. You really get to see them dive into this more darker side, and I thought that worked really well. And then when Brooke ends up saving her, how this was the moment that really turned things around and got her to appreciate Trevor more. It got her to realize how good of a guy he really is and how he is someone that she should that she should be with, which I thought that relationship was actually really sweet. I liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to. I wasn't sure how I was gonna feel about it, but I thought they did a really good job when it came to that relationship. And when she also recognizes that Ramirez is this horrible person and that she needs to kill him and finally just put an end to all of his misdemeanors, and now they just have him on constant watch because they know that he's never going to actually die. He's always going to be rebirthed by the devil. And a lot of people have brought this up. Obviously, this is not what really happened to Richard Ramirez in real life, and I'm okay with that. I think that this is supposed to be just sort of an alternate history. It's not trying to be, anything serious. It's not claiming to be an accurate representation. This isn't the first time that they've had a historical figure on American Horror Story that they haven't really, told the real story of, so I don't really have a problem with them doing it here either. So yeah, I really love the moment where they are just tearing him to shreds, and then also when they finally kill Margaret and they chop her to pieces and they put her in that wood chipper. I mean, that alone just shows the lunacy of this season. That alone just shows how this season doesn't take itself too seriously. The way that's how she dies, in a fucking wood chipper, I thought was priceless, and I really liked the way they ended up wrapping things up there overall. So I thought that was a really satisfying reveal. Some characters that I felt didn't really get the proper ending that they should. Xavier's one of them. I just felt like after he got his face burnt and he was killing, they just never really knew what to do with him from there, so I was not that satisfied with the way they wrap things up with his character. I also felt Ray's character was completely sidelined by the end. I like that he ends up saving Brooke, but I just didn't really feel like they did all that much with him. I felt like they could have maybe dived deeper into the idea that, you know, the black guy is usually the one to die first in slasher films. Like, they could have really, like, dived into that, because they did that a lot. Like, they tried to explore cliches of characters and show how they don't have to be that way, but they didn't really do that with Ray, and that was a little disappointing, because I thought they did some really good work with Donna, where she actually does end up surviving. She becomes like this clerk, and she's helping, you know, she's helping Bobby out, and you think that she's the final girl, but it turns out Brooke actually did survive. She was you know, basically rescued by Ray, and I liked that. I like that Brooke does end up surviving, and she gets to live like this quiet and idyllic life, and doesn't have to think about Camp Redwood anymore, hasn't thought about it in years, is now like with this dermatologist. But I kind of did want Donna to be the final girl, just because at that point I was more invested in her than I was in Brooke, and I think they did some really good work with her. And again, I didn't mind the idea that Brooke is alive. In fact, most of the things they present in this finale, like I said, I thought were plausible. I didn't think this is what I'm saying, where I don't think this season went crazy off the rails or anything. I think by the end, everything that happened made sense. It didn't feel like these characters like dramatically changed or anything. And I think that's something that American Horror Story usually has a problem with. You know, they don't know how to get characters from point A to point B naturally, and I feel like this season they actually did, and that's something that did really impress me by the end of it all, and I liked the way they ended up wrapping things up. But and then also the character, I think, of Chet, like I said, it just never worked for me. I didn't really feel like they did enough with him. You know, he's just like this guy who does steroids, and you know, the way he died I thought was kind of cool, but like other than that, you know, they try to do this moment where he realizes that he's bisexual and things like that, and I don't know, I just wasn't a big fan of him. I didn't feel like his character served much of a purpose at the end of the day, and I honestly feel you could have cut him out of it entirely. And this is why I wish they would have given more to, say, like Ray's character, because instead they devote a lot of time to Chet, who I just never got invested in, and I think they could have done more with him. But overall, like I said, I enjoyed a lot of what they did in this finale. I thought that it was a lot more believable than usual, from everything they did with Trevor and Montana to, you know, that great moment at the end with Bobby. It felt a lot more satisfying than I think most AHS finales do, and that's something I will definitely commend them for. Overall, American Horror Story 1984 is a very fun season. It never takes itself too seriously. It has a cast that I think is fully committed, and it really does embrace the 80s very well, but also isn't afraid of poking fun at some of the more ridiculous trends that the 80s did have, which I definitely really did enjoy. It's very funny at times. It's got like a really strong cast, and it actually does go into some pretty emotional arcs that I think did overall make the season that much better. It's definitely one of the least overly convoluted seasons. There are directions that it went in that I wasn't really sure about, but I think overall they did a pretty good job. There are some characters that I think by the end became a little bit too one-note for me, and I think that some characters got a little sidelined by the end, but other than that, I think this is probably one of the more consistent American Horror Story seasons in quite a bit. I had a very good time with 1984 overall, and I am going to give it a B. Over, guys, my review of American Horror Story 1984. Let me know what you guys saw this season overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.